Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desitarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 1 Chapter 5 Text number 16. Vichaksano Syarthati Veditum Vibur Anantaparasya Nivritita Sukham Pavartam Manasya Gunar Anatmanas Tato Bhavam Darshaya Chestitam Vibho. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality, retired from the activities of material happiness, deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. So this is the chapter Narada's instructions on Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, theological science is a difficult subject, especially when it deals with the transcendental nature of God. It is not a subject matter to be understood by persons who are too much attached to material activities. Only the very expert, who have almost retired from materialistic activities by culture of spiritual knowledge, can be admitted to the study of this great science. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly stated that out of many hundreds and thousands of men, only one person deserves to enter into transcendental realization. And out of many thousands of such transcendentally realized persons, only a few can understand the theological science, specifically dealing with God as a person. Shri Vyasadeva is therefore advised by Narada to describe the science of God directly by relating his transcendental activities. Vyasadeva is himself a personality expert in this science, and he is unattached to material enjoyment. Therefore, he is the right person to describe it, and Sukadeva Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, is the right person to receive it. Srimad Bhagavatam is the topmost theological science, and therefore it can react on the layman as medicinal doses, because it contains the transcendental activities of the Lord. There is no difference between the Lord and the literature. The literature is the factual literary incarnation of the Lord. So the laymen can hear the narration of the activities of the Lord. Thereby, they are able to associate with the Lord and thus gradually become purified from material diseases. The expert devotees also can discover novel ways and means to convert the non-devotees in terms of particular time and circumstance. Devotional service is dynamic activity, and the expert devotees can find out competent means to inject it into the dull brains of the materialistic population. Such transcendental activities of the devotees for the service of the Lord can bring a new order of life to the foolish society of materialistic men. Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and his subsequent followers exhibited expert dexterity in this connection. By following the same method, one can bring the materialistic men of this age of quarrel into order for peaceful life and transcendental realization. So repeat the verse one more time. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality, retired from the activities of material happiness, deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. So here, Narada Muni is instructing Vyasadeva not only why he was depressed and the cause of his depression, but how he could remedy the fact that he wrote so many scriptures but did not give enough attention to description of the Lord's transcendental activities, personality, qualities, pastimes, and so forth. So here, Narada is saying that, first of all, he acknowledges that Vyasadeva is the right person to correctly explain who the Lord is. And what is that special qualification? Well, he's an expert personality, retired from the activities of material happiness. And that is probably the most important qualification right there, because as long as one is attached to material happiness, they cannot really enter into this subject matter properly, because it's a transcendental subject matter. The Lord and his activities and his pastimes and so forth. So unless one has the equilibrium of mind that's free of the inebriety or intoxication of sense gratification, they can't really get interested in the subject. They'll be much more interested in how to make more money, how to spend it on sense gratification. But a person who's not in the enjoying mood, and it says here, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. So unless there is a person who's sober, not attached to sense gratification, not seeking material happiness, but on the other hand, seeking transcendental realization, there are two things. There's transcendental realization and transcendental activity. Those two things go hand in hand. Transcendental realization or spiritual knowledge is not enough. One must be practically engaged in devotional service also. Understanding is not enough. One has to also act. And so now Vyasadeva is advised by Narada to describe the science of God directly by relating his transcendental activities. So there is a science of God, and it's demonstrated through the Lord's transcendental activities, right? And so usually, if you want to understand who a person is, you have to understand also what they've done in life. You can't simply say, well, they were planning on doing this. Of course they didn't do it. And they were planning on doing that, which is a noble thing, but they didn't do that either. Well, what does that mean? If there's no action, then all those plans are useless. So Krishna not only has great intentions, but he also acts in great ways. And there's no difference between the Lord's actions and himself. And therefore, when there's literature that is factual description of the Lord's transcendental activities, that is the greatest literature. So the Bible, the New Testament Bible is all about Jesus Christ's actions. The first 4 books, what is it? Matthew, Mark, John. That's 4 books. Matthew. Anyway, the first 4 books of the Bible are all about what Jesus did, and then the rest of it is more or less about his disciples and their realizations of what Jesus did and communicating that and spreading the message to others. It's called the Evangel. The Evangel is the good news about Jesus Christ. Right? So he did a lot of things in a short period of time. It's basically his birth up to the age of 12. Then there's a gap between 12 and 30, and then from 30 to 33 when he was... They don't know what he was doing between 12 years old and 30 years old. Of course, people have conjectured that he went to India and he learned about spiritual life. That most probably is true. So here, the layman can hear the narration of the activities of the Lord. Thereby, they are able to associate with the Lord and thus gradually become purified from material diseases. Well, so many biographies have been written about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and different presidents in the United States, and different generals, who fought in wars, and they're, in a sense, glorified. And then scientists, what they've discovered, and movie stars and their lives. And everybody's writing books about all these subjects of the actions of activities of different so-called famous people. Most of it is all nonsense, useless literature. But when you describe, like, for example, is there any other book that describes what God does every day? No, there isn't. And what his abode is, where he lives, and who he associates with, and so many deep transcendental activities of the Lord, loving relationships. There's no description like that about God in any other scripture except Srimad Bhagavatam. So we see everything Prabhupada is saying here is true. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality, retired from the activities of material happiness, deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. So this explains why a lot of people are not interested in the subject matter, and even those who are interested, they have sometimes a difficult time understanding, because there's a direct correlation between interest in or disinterest in material happiness and interest in the subject of Krishna consciousness. The more one's interested in material happiness, the less efforts they make to understand about Krishna. The less they're interested in material happiness and are concerned to understand knowledge of spiritual values, they take an interest in the subject. See? It's like we had just a few people here. Right? How many did we start off in the beginning? I think it was 75, right? Right? 75 or 80 people. 67 people. So we have, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 people. Yeah. And these are devotees, right? So you see, the real interest in this subject is weak, because there's so many other subjects people are concerned with, right? Huh?
Excited about.
What?
Excited about the other subject.
Yeah, they're excited about the other subjects, like keeping their job or something, you know. So, thereby they are able to associate with the Lord and thus gradually become purified from material diseases. Now, what are those material diseases? Well, there's diseases of the body, there's diseases of the mind, and there's diseases of the soul. Although the soul is eternal, it can still be affected in many ways. So, now how's the soul affected? This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita. The soul is affected, this is explained at the end of the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And it's a very interesting explanation Prabhupada gives, where he says, first of all, Arjuna asks a question. He says, Arjuna uvacha atakena prayukto yam papam charati purushaha aniccan apivarsneya phalat eva niyojitaha. So Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Interesting question. And that is 3rd chapter, verse number 36. And Prabhupada explains in the purport, a living entity, as part and parcel of the Supreme, is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine. Sanguine means very pertinent. As to the perverted nature of the living entities. And you notice these words, talking about perverted nature of the living entities, and they're sinful even against their own will sometimes. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he's still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. Now what is this other cause that can force people to be sinful even though they don't want to? You see? So now Krishna is going to answer the question. He begins, Kama esa krodha esa ragaguna samudbhavam mahasana mahapapma vidi enam iha vairinam. So the Lord says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Now, it's interesting how the Christians will say, it's the devil. Here they don't say it's the devil. They say it's lust. And this is very interesting. We can begin to see major differences now between Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Krishna consciousness. So, this lust which is later on transformed into wrath or anger, is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. In the purport, Prabhupada says, when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Well, that means we all originally loved Krishna, according to what's being said here. And then it became transformed into lust. And how that happens is going to be explained now. And it's an extremely important explanation. And it happens in association with the mode of passion, or rajaguna. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Notice that when milk becomes yogurt, you can't go back to milk again. Although they're the same substance, but you can't go back. And a yogurt acts differently than milk does. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath meaning anger. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. And this is very interesting, because if this is true, that means that everyone in this world is in a state of illusion right now. Right? And in a state of illusion, and a process took place how they got there. And that's the whole point, is that this lust is the all-devouring enemy of man. And what does it do? It can force a person to act sinfully, although they don't even want to. But still they do it. And if you step back and analyze society today, you'll see that this is a fact. People are doing all kinds of crazy things, and they're acting in very strange ways, and they're being forced to do it, even against their own will, because of living in a constant state of illusion. So here it explains. It says, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust. Now we will discuss how that happens. As milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. So, how does that happen? It happens by associating with the mode of passion. Now, I've seen this in myself, and I've seen it in many other people. And it always happens sometime in pre-teenage and teenage years. Like before one is a teenager, let's say teenager begins at puberty. Right? So before that, the child is generally submissive. Generally. Not, sometimes they're not, but most of the time they're submissive, and they acquiesce to parents' orders and instructions, right? And they're able to learn a lot of things, right? What to do, what not to do. As soon as puberty comes, they begin to manifest different characteristics than what they were manifesting when they were younger. And that's because at puberty, their unfinished desires from previous lives awaken again. Right? And certain things happen physically and mentally. and their awareness of the world expands. Now, today, that happens usually because of schools that they go to, and secondly, due to weapons of mass distraction like televisions and cell phones and internet connections, social media, and so forth. But it was happening before also, in other ways. But it's all based on awareness. They become aware of more things that they weren't aware of before. So regardless of how much the parents are trying to protect them, still that awareness expands. And usually what happens is they become more situated in the mode of passion, Rajaguna. So that's where the change of love turned into the change of love turning into lust takes place, because it's an association with the mode of passion. What is the mode of passion? Well, it is basically becoming aware of sense gratification, of boy, girl, man, woman relationships, and the allure of being like a movie star or a sports star or a music, or, a singer or a dancer, choreographer, all these so-called glamorous things affect them. And there's clothing and music and food, all these things are part of an identity of passion and lust. See? And kids get very affected by it. Right? So you see that they start developing a certain taste in clothing, they develop a certain taste in music, they develop a certain taste in literature, they develop a certain taste in movies, and this and that, and they get overwhelmed by the mode of passion. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. So, parents tell their kids, get off the internet, and they get really upset. They get mad. And the parents say, do your homework, why are you spending so much time watching television? And they get angry. And they develop a certain secret life also. So when lust is unsatisfied, one becomes angry, and wrath or anger is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. So as soon as one is affected by the desire to enjoy and dominate material nature, that's called material existence, because they'll spend all their time trying to dominate and enjoy. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Well, what is that entanglement? It means that one is so busy doing so many things that they have no time for Krishna consciousness. That means they're fully entangled and they're fully in illusion, because there's no time at all for Krishna consciousness. Wrath is the manifestation of mode of ignorance. So now, when it goes from lust, which is a mode of passion, to wrath, now we're in the mode of ignorance. Because in the mode of ignorance, people do self-destructive things to themselves and to others. Wrath is the by the way, there's this big controversy about all these fires in Australia. So all the movie stars and politicians are saying it's due to global warming. But yet at the same time, in the news, they're reporting that over 180 people have been arrested for starting fires. So now the question is it the 180 people who started these fires? Or is it global warming that caused the fires? You see, it's very interesting how there is attribution of cause. This is what confuses people. What is the actual cause? Now, it is neither the people that set the fires, and it's neither global warming. So then what is it? It's global sin. That's what it is. And no one can understand that. I mean, no materialist can understand that. There's a direct correlation between the raging of nature and the degree of sinful activities that are going on. Reduce the sinful activities and there's pacification of nature. Increase the sinful activities, there is the, let's say, agitation and wrath of nature. Okay. So, can you explain this to materialistic people? No. No. They say, we got science behind global warming. Well, so what? That doesn't mean that that is the cause. Just like, look what's happening in Puerto Rico. That poor island is being affected by hurricanes, now earthquakes, and the people are getting very frustrated and they're miserable. They don't have electricity. The last earthquake knocked off their grid again. It's not the first time. And you have people without electricity for weeks and months. How can they work? How can they earn a living? You see. So Puerto Rico is in bad shape because there's something going on that they're getting hit over and over again with disasters, natural disasters. A lot of Puerto Ricans are moving out of Puerto Rico and coming to, it's part of the United States, so they can legally, go to the mainland and live there and not live, where they were born. So this is a thing that, what is causing all this? Like in Australia, these major fires, and even in the summertime, California and other places, and then wintertime, there's flooding. Like right now, there's a lot of flooding in Washington State, right? And there are windstorms, and there's hurricanes, and there's earthquakes, and all these things are happening. And people say it's global, it's climate change, or it's this or that. But according to Ishopanishad, it is not that. And so in the 14th chapter, and other places we'll go over now, it says, 14th chapter, it says, unfortunately, foolish men have misinterpreted. It says, this is the Lord's last instruction in Bhagavad Gita, 1866. Sarvadharman prityaja mamekam saranam praja. Give up all other processes and just surrender unto me alone, Krishna says. Unfortunately, foolish men have misunderstood this prime teaching and misled the masses of people in diverse ways. People have been urged to open hospitals, but not to educate themselves to enter into the spiritual kingdom by devotional service. They have been taught to take interest only in temporary relief work, which can never bring real happiness to the living entity. They start varieties of public and semi-governmental institutions to tackle the devastating power of nature. But they don't know how to pacify insurmountable nature. Many men are advertised as great scholars of the Bhagavad Gita, but they overlook the Gita's message, by which material nature can be pacified. Powerful nature can be pacified only by the awakening of God consciousness, as clearly pointed out in the Bhagavad Gita 7:14. Daivahi esa gunamayi mama maya durayaya mameviye prapadyante mayametam tarantite. This material nature, Krishna says, is impossible to overcome. But one who surrenders unto me can easily overcome it. So, the process of pacification of nature is to engage in Krishna consciousness and awaken one's God consciousness. Powerful nature can be pacified only by the awakening of God consciousness, as clearly pointed out in the Bhagavad Gita 7:14. Okay? So, here we have a statement, one little statement, just a few lines by Prabhupada, and now we can see the hoax of global climate change, or global warming, or is it people who are setting fires to dry wooded areas and bush, or is it Trump's fault, or because of Trump derangement syndrome, people are deranged so they're setting the fire, whatever, you can come up with 1,000 reasons that are all incorrect. The only correct one is that people have not been awakened to God consciousness. They're engaged in sinful activities, in materialistic activities. They want to dominate and enjoy nature. Nature belongs to Krishna, it doesn't belong to them. And their so-called enjoyment of nature is basically translated into sinful activity. So here it says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities are part and parcels of his spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So just today I read something about, what's his name? Bob Crosby, the black, Bill Cosby, yeah, the black comic or comedian. Very famous man. He used to be called the nation's father, right? He had a program. He was a father. A family thing. The whole thing was a nonsense program. I never watched it my whole life. And actually, he lived not far away from where I used to live, in Philadelphia. Anyway, he's in jail for 10 years. He's 82 years old. We'll see if he lasts 10 years in jail. He'll probably die in jail. And why is he in jail? Because he abused women. Because he was the nation's father. Everybody trusted him, right? He had so many young ladies that come to him to further their career, in comedy or in acting and so forth. And he was like a father figure to him. But it just so happened that he was actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's a saying. It's a biblical saying. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Wolves. There are foxes, but foxes are not so dangerous for human beings. But wolves eat people. They're extremely dangerous. They're wild and carnivorous animals, and they'll kill human beings. They're not afraid. So he's described as a wolf in sheep's clothing. And just like you have, what was that? There's a wolf, and what was it? There's a young girl, and the wolf, and she's alone in the house, and the wolf comes and is dressed as a lady, has a bonnet on her hair, and the wolf knocks on the door and wants to get some favor from the little girl, and the little girl said, "Well, my mother said I shouldn't open the door." And the wolf said, "Oh, you can open the door. I'm like your mommy," So it's a story. I mean, I forget the name of the story, but it's a famous story that kids learn. So, yeah, Bill Crosby was like that wolf in sheep's clothing, and he took advantage of many women. And how did he do it? He used pills. Drugs. And he would, when they were not looking, he'd drop these pills in a drink, and he'd offer them a drink. Or sometimes the ladies would come to him, he's a father figure, and say, "Well, there's so much distress." And he'd say, "Oh, well, why don't you take this pill? You'll feel better, And as soon as they would take the pill, then he would take advantage of them. Right? And this went on for years. And previously, there was people, if a woman complained that, he took advantage of me, no one would believe them because he's the father of the nation, right? He's the father figure. And he's such a clean-cut guy, right? But then this Me Too movement started, and women started coming forward. So that's just to give a little background. So today, Bill Crosby, he tried to get out of jail by claiming that he was convicted because of the Me Too movement. Of course, the judge didn't accept that, but he's like trying to portray himself as a victim rather than as a perpetrator, or as they say, the perp. And he's saying that this would not have happened 10 years ago, but it happened in this conjunction of this Me Too movement, when so many women came forward and accused the big men and politicians and movie stars and people like Bill Crosby of abusing them. So, is that the cause of why he's in jail? No, that's a phony reason. And that's why the judge didn't accept it. He's in jail because he couldn't control his lust. What is the all-devouring enemy of mankind? It's lust. How does lust develop? In association with the mode of passion. And later on, transformed into anger, because one's lusty desires are frustrated. And when one becomes angry, they go into the mode of ignorance. And then they're in complete illusion at that point. So that's explained in Bhagavad Gita, verses 62 to 63, how one becomes, when one does not see properly, dhyayato vishayam pumsa, and so forth. And eventually one goes completely into illusion. And in the illusion, they begin to act in very strange ways, and they fall down into the whirlpool of material life. So, therefore it says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. So that means God is the Father of all living entities. Now, why would he have children. Well, why does a mother and father want to have? Why does a couple want to have children? To increase their happiness. So they bring a child into the world, and all of a sudden they get even closer in their bond to protect the child and love the child. And the child, in different periods of the child's life, they feel great happiness. The first time the child smiles, and the first time the child walks, and the first time the child speaks, and so forth. So it's all about increasing their happiness. Well, Krishna is a person also, just like we are persons, and he also wants to increase his transcendental happiness by sharing with his children. Just like mother and father want to share their happiness with their children. Okay, so the Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. That's the point. When the service attitude is transformed into the propensity, in other words, the attraction, the predilection for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. So what is lust? Lust is the excessive desire for sense gratification, and it develops gradually due to association with the mode of passion. So the mode of passion, there's passionate music, there's passionate food, there's passionate clothes, there's passionate literature, there's passionate colors, there's passionate environments, and so forth, right? And there's passionate influences. And this is the whole point. Like today, over and over again, everywhere, you'll see women's clothes become more and more revealing of the body. Now, compare that to the burqa. Right? You don't see anything. You hardly even see their eyes, right? That's it. And there's a reason for it, because Muhammad understood that, when men see a woman's body, their passion increases, unfortunately, but that's a fact. So therefore, he wanted all women to wear a burqa. Right? You can't see anything. You hardly see the eyes. Even the burqas, they increase the amount of eyes that you can see. Depends, if you end up in Somalia, you don't see anything. It's even covered, and they just have a net. There's a net over the eyes. You can't even see the eyes, right? Yeah. And but if you look at modern fashions, it's all about exposing more and more of the body, right? They have see-through clothes now. They have skin-tight clothes. You can't tell the difference between the skin or the flesh and the dress. So this whole, let's say, drift from the, like if you look at pictures of ladies, in 1910 in the United States, right? They had these really long dresses, they had bonnets on, their whole body was covered, you could see their face, but the rest of the body was covered. And little by little, it changed. And you get into the 1920s, and they're no longer wearing those, let's say, long clothes. Now their clothes are getting shorter and shorter, and more of their bodies are being shown. And then now, there's no limit anymore. So this is all about advertising the body. And why is that? Because men want to see that. That's why. There's an explanation of of why there was the emancipation of women movement. Prabhupada explained this actually. It was started by the men. It wasn't started by the women. It was started by the men. Men who wanted to break down the barriers that protected women so that they could take advantage of the women. So they encouraged the women's liberation movement. And what happened? It got so bad in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and up until now, that the institution of marriage has been broken down seriously. And men nowadays can get away with abusing women and not be responsible. And where did the responsibility go to? To the government. So at one point, it's better to be divorced than to be married, because when a woman is divorced, the government takes care of her. And the more children she has, the more money she makes. The more children she has with different men, the more money she makes. Did you know that? Yeah?
You get more food stamps and everything.
Huh?
You get more food stamps and everything.
It's not food stamps. You get food stamps, of course, but no, you get subsidized rent, you get Medicare, you get so many things, and it's a very famous thing. There's a whole bunch of Somalians that have immigrated to the United States from Somalia, which is in a state of war. So, they get more preference for immigrating to the United States. So the Somali, let's say, special enterprise is to have get social services in like 6 or 8 different states. Now you might say, how do they do that? Well, they get married with different women. They're breaking the law by doing that, but they get married with different women, and they apply for Social Security benefits in different states with different wives and different sets of children. And some of them have been caught. They've defrauded the government of tens of millions of dollars. And or else they get married with someone, and then they get divorced, and then that lady has a lot of babies, so she's getting so much money, right? So they do this in different states, and it takes years to catch them. In the meantime, by the time they're ready to catch them, they already moved back to Somalia with all the money. So it's unbelievable what people will think of and do, nowadays. So, yeah, the government became the big daddy for all the women who husbands or even they're not married. There's men running around the United States that have like 10, 20, 30 kids, and they've never been married. And all those women are getting money from the government. And they just go around and if the woman doesn't give them money, they beat them up, And usually, women are not, they just go along with it for up to a certain point. So what's happening is this complete breakdown of morality and it's happening all over the world. So we all have this partial independence, but by misuse of this independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, people come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities. And when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So in other words, the system is organized in such a way that people will get more and more defeated in their attempts to be successful in the material world. And in a state of despair and utter defeat, there's a chance that they may begin to inquire, why am I suffering like this? What is my real duty in life? Is there a God? And so forth. So, this might take one life, or it might take 1,000,000 lives, and where one gets so disgusted that they sincerely seek knowledge of why they are suffering so drastically. So the Lord gives facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra, wherein it is said, Atato Brahma Jigyasu, one should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadasya Yato Nivayad Itaratas Cha, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Rama, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana, but by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also, in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his wrath, meaning anger, upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. So, originally we all had love for Krishna, but by associating with the mode of passion, love was transformed into lust, and now it is possible to retransform lust back into love. But it requires proper treatment. What is that treatment? That is the Krishna consciousness activity, chanting and so forth. So then it says that as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So you have three examples here. The fire covered by smoke, mirror covered by dust, or embryo is covered by the womb. So there's 3 degrees of covering a living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. Pure consciousness means his Krishna consciousness is covered. This covering is but lust, under different manifestations like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo, or the womb covering the embryo. While lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. So when you see your image in a dusty mirror, well, it's not clear, but at least you can see something, right? And it's more than the smoke that covers a fire. there's so much smoke you can't. I mean, you can feel the fire, you can't quite see it. But now with a dusty mirror, you can see something. In other words, when the living entity exhibits its Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early age. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position, for the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling the smoke and the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy lust by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. Then it says, thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So one becomes lusty, they become like Harvey Weinstein. Right? Can't control themselves at all. They're like a wild animal. You know, his trial is just starting now, but you know all the nonsense that he's done is going to come out in this trial, and he'll probably be convicted and put in jail like Bill Crosby and so many others. So, it is said in the Manu Samhita that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually, that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. That's a very powerful statement by Prabhupada. That little bit of pleasure one feels through sense gratification is actually the greatest enemy, because one becomes convinced that they have to work harder for sense gratification. And it's not worth it, though, because the periods of sense gratification are relatively short, and the periods of working for sense gratification are very long and arduous and difficult. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So the senses, the mind, and intelligence are the sitting places of lust. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next-door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 10:84-13. So lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This is a thorough explanation of how lust is how love for Krishna is transformed into lust, and how we become completely under the control of Maya, where we don't really realize what we're doing. We're being forced to act. We're not independently acting anymore. We're being forced by this lust, anger, and greed to do all kinds of self-destructive things. So it says, Yasyatma buddhi kunape chidatuke swadi kalatra disu momna ijadi yatirtha buddhi salile nakarisij janesu avigyesu saeva gokara. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements, kapha, vita, vayu, with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge, there is to be considered like an ass or a cow. So Prabhupada says this false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:84-13, what we just read. The person considers the body to be himself, his kinsman, or the expansion of his body to be his kinsman, and the land is born in to be worshipable, and such person goes to holy places just to take a bath and not to associate with holy persons and hear from them. Then it says, therefore, Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Now, all this discussion began by my talking about what's happening in Australia. Massive fires. There's one thing about Australia. There's plenty of sense gratification there. Huge amount of sense gratification. And, well, first of all, how was Australia started? The British had an idea. They took all the criminals in London and sent them to Australia. Australia is like farthest you can get away from England, right? And it's an island, see. It's like Alcatraz. Alcatraz is an island near San Francisco. It's covered by water on four sides. So it's a famous prison. You can go. It's one of the places that all tourists that go to San Francisco, they visit the island of Alcatraz, right? Well, the British had Australia. It's a gigantic Alcatraz. You know, it's actually not a nice place. They made it nice, you know, eventually. At least parts of it. It's mainly on the coast. You know, on the coast area. The rest of it is horrible. You know, it's like desert, and wild animals, and so many wild animals in Australian, bugs and spiders and crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles and alligators. It's a horrible place, actually, but yet the weather is nice on the coastal parts of it, and they build up a huge society of sense gratification there, right? So there's this correlation between sense gratification and disasters, and we're seeing it with our own eyes today. You know, people are suffering like anything, especially in the southeastern part of Australia. You can't even breathe there anymore. Smoke everywhere. Fire, they can't stop the fires. They're just going wild. This happens in California also. I remember in the 1980s, there was a huge fire in the east side of San Francisco, on the East Bay side. 2,000 houses, and all of them were expensive houses in the hills of Oakland and Berkeley. You know, they burned down. They burned, and there was a great, like say, fear that the fire was going to spread and burn the Lawrence Science Complex and the University of California and the temple in Berkeley. I mean, this fire was huge, right? Fortunately, the government used everything they had to stop the fire in the Berkeley Hills before it came to Lawrence Science buildings, because that's where they built the atomic bomb there. So if that place caught fire, there's no telling what was going to happen, you know. And the temple was only like 2 miles away from there. Right, so if that place caught fire, then all of Berkeley would have caught fire also, the University of Washington. And it was like a horrible situation. But you see, that's nature. And why are these things happening, especially California? California has a lot of problems, right? There's flooding, there's drought, there's fires, there's earthquakes, and so forth, because there's a lot of nonsense goes on there. There's homelessness, even our Mukunda Prabhu, where did you go? You went to San Francisco. What happened? Let your wife tell him. She probably got more affected by it than you did. What happened?
We took the tickets for Alcatraz, but since we spoke to you, we didn't go there, cancel our tour. And my son also got
Injured, yeah, and?
It was like
No, was your car vandalized?
No.
Oh, no, whose car was vandalized? They went to San Francisco. Who?
Rakesh.
Oh, Rakesh, yeah. Rakesh and his wife go to San Francisco. As soon as they get there, they park the car. They went somewhere, they came back, it was vandalized. And they stole things from the car. And they finally caught the guy, who was a homeless guy that was living in the street in the neighborhood, right? And, they went there, and the first time they parked the car, it gets vandalized. That's San Francisco. It's not a safe place anymore. So you didn't go to Alcatraz. Oh, you missed the best.
The thing is, like, everybody over there goes there, so there the jails, the cells are made. So typically everybody gets inside the cell and asks everybody else to take a picture of it.
Really? Oh,
I
my.
also did that, so I remember.
But it's a very inauspicious place. Some of the worst criminals were held in Alcatraz, like Al Capone and others. Horrible place. You know, I don't know why anyone would go visit it. You know? It's not a nice place. It's not. It's
It's like a small island, so to take the ferry, you take all the way, then you go to the jail, put yourself into the jail, get a picture. Exactly.
Yeah. So all this is happening because love, or our original love for Krishna, has been transformed into lust, and it gets worse and worse. So it says here, the Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. Not jnana refers to knowledge of the self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnana refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship with the Supreme Lord. So in other words, jnana is distinguishing between the body and the soul, and vijnana is understanding the relationship of our soul to Krishna. Right? It is explained thus in Srimad Bhagavatam, Jnanam paramaguyam me yad vijnana samanvitam sarahasyam tad angam cha grihana gaditam maya. The knowledge of the self and Supreme Self is very confidential and mysterious, but such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord Himself. Bhagavad Gita gives us that general and specific knowledge of the self. The living entities are parts and parcels of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna conscious and act accordingly. Lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. See, this is the importance of children having proper education, not this nonsense education that they're receiving today, so that they understand, so that their natural love for Krishna does not deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service to the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. So this is what we were discussing today, and that is how the original love for Krishna is transformed into lust, and how it is possible to transform lust back into love of Krishna. But how it becomes lust is very, very important to understand. It's by association with the mode of passion, which later on, if there's frustration of lusty desires, it becomes anger. And in a stage of anger, now we're in the mode of ignorance. And in the mode of ignorance, we get deeper and deeper into illusion and addicted to sense gratification. And there, the more we succeed in sense gratification and increasing wealth, we become completely bewildered, and we live completely in a state of illusion. Okay, so that was verse 16. So it says, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his subsequent followers exhibited expert dexterity or expertise. In this connection, by following the same method, one can bring the materialistic men of this age of quarrel into order for peaceful life and transcendental realization. So, Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement is the panacea, the healing herb for this nasty disease called lust. And it can bring materialistic men of this age of quarrel into order for peaceful life and transcendental realization. So if you want to stop the fires in Australia, if you want to stop all the mayhem in America and Europe and the Middle East and so forth, become Krishna conscious. Spread Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. That's why if we became serious here about doing Sankirtan, even if it's only once a week, and we go out with 200 plus people, distribute books, distribute prasada, distribute flowers, distribute cookies, distribute love and devotion to Krishna, it could change the whole Seattle area. It can change the whole state of Washington. But we don't realize the power of Krishna consciousness. That's why people are staying home. It's not, oh, well, we'll have a peaceful life and everybody else can go to hell. You can't have a peaceful life if everyone else goes to hell, because they'll make your life hellish. You can only have a peaceful life if you spread Krishna consciousness. You can't live as an island in a world of mayhem and confusion. You have to spread Krishna consciousness as a self-interest if you want to protect your peaceful life. You're not going to live peacefully in the middle of as a little island in an ocean of mayhem. It's not possible. It'll affect you. But if you spread Krishna consciousness, then you have a whole society that's Krishna conscious. Then you'll be peaceful. And nature will cooperate. Nature will be will be pacified. And it makes life easier for everyone. When nature is regulated rain, regulated changing of seasons and so forth, then there's regulated production of grains and vegetables and so forth. And cows are happy, people are happy. There's no more slaughterhouses with massive killing of cows and animals. And all of a sudden, it transforms the world into Vaikuntha. And it's possible, it's not a fairy tale. But we have to do the work of Krishna consciousness, of spreading Krishna consciousness. So we should become much more serious, and we should talk this up. I mean, I shouldn't be the only person talking about it. Let's put it like that. Right? I should not be the only person talking like this. Everybody should be talking like this. Because this is what this movement is about. It's not one person talking about, let's all go out on Sankirtan. Everyone should be excited to go out and spread Krishna consciousness. If nothing else, for self-preservation. Okay, so now we're going to text 17. One who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage. Yet there is no danger of his becoming unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. So this is a very famous verse. Srila Prabhupada quoted it often. Tyakva swadharmam charanam bhujam harir bhajana pakvota patet tato yadi yatra kwa vabudram vabadram amud amusyakim kovarta apto bhajatam swadharmataha. So, there are other verses that are similar to this. We already read them in the second chapter where it says, Dharmasya, what is that? Yeah, so second chapter, verse number 8, Dharmasvanustita punsa vishvaksena katasya yad. Natpada yadira tim shrama eva hi kevalam. The occupational activities a man performs according to his own position are only so much useless labor if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the personality of Godhead. And then number 9, dharma sahiya pavargasya narto ritayo pakalpate nartasya dharma kantakasya srama kamo labaya hi smrita. All occupational engagements are certainly meant for ultimate liberation. They should never be performed for material gain. Furthermore, according to sages, one who is engaged in the ultimate occupational service should never use material gain to cultivate sense gratification. So these verses are similar to this one. Tyakva swadharmam charanam bhaja harir. One who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage. Yet, there's no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. So, why? Because Krishna says, apichet, what's that verse? Sudarachaya bhajanti mam ananyabhag sadur eva samantavya samyak vyavasito hi saha. So, that verse is all about even the most sinful person who, even up to the point of killing a brahmana or a cow, if they even if one commits the most abominable act, if he engages in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. In other words, one may fall down in the initial stages of Krishna consciousness, and one may even commit a very heinous act when they fall down. However, if they continue in Krishna consciousness under proper guidance by spiritual masters, Siksha and Diksha gurus, they should still be considered saintly. And here Prabhupada explains that even if one fully engaged in devotional service to the Lord is sometimes found engaged in abominable activities, these activities should be considered to be like the spots that resemble the mark of a rabbit on the moon. Such spots do not become an impediment to the diffusion of moonlight. Similarly, the accidental fall down of a devotee from the path of saintly character does not make him or her abominable. On the other hand, one should not misunderstand that a devotee in transcendental devotional service can act in all kinds of abominable ways. This verse only refers to an accident due to the strong power of material connections. Devotional service is more or less a declaration of war against illusory energy. As long as one is not strong enough to fight the illusory energy, there may be accidental fall downs. But when one is strong enough, he is no longer subjected to such fall downs, as previously explained. No one should take advantage of this verse and commit nonsense and think that he is still a devotee. If he does not improve in his character by devotional service, then it is to be understood that he is not a high devotee, not a good devotee, basically. So, sometimes people make mistakes, even though they're engaged in devotional service. But if they continue service, in other words, they have to admit their mistake, ask for forgiveness, understand, why they committed such mistakes or mistake, and get guidance, then they should not be humiliated. They should be given a chance to rectify themselves. But if they regularly do that, then that is a serious violation of Krishna consciousness. This is only talking about accidental fall downs due to previous attachments or bad association. So here it says, if you engage in Krishna consciousness and you fall down, you're not a loser. Because whatever you've done stays as a positive benefit to you eternally. And the next time you take up Krishna consciousness, you start from the point where you left off. You're not reduced to zero. Because whatever you do for Krishna, Krishna never forgets, and it always stays as a positive asset. But if you're not Krishna conscious, and you do all your duties, you're charitable, you take care of your family, you educate your kids, you gain nothing at all. Shrama eva hi kevalam. It's just a waste of time. Or as it says here, it says, Amusya Kim, let's see. Kim ko varta aptu bhajatam swadharma taha. That though fully engaged in occupational duties, one does not gain anything, because nothing was done for Krishna. It was all done for his personal sense gratification, for the family, for this, for that. So one doesn't gain anything. You're going to lose it all at the moment of death, and you only have your karma to take with you. You can't take any of the material benefits that you acquired in life. But if you've been Krishna conscious and you fall down, you're not a loser, because whatever you did for Krishna, it stays with you. Neha vikramanastasti pratijayana vidyate swapam apiyasya dharmasya chayate mahato bayat. This is explained in the 7th chapter also. Bhagavad Gita, verse number 40, is it? No. I'm sorry, the 2nd chapter, verse number 40. It says, now vikramanastasti. In this endeavor, there's never any loss or diminution. And whatever one can do for Krishna, or whatever little advancement on this path, can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. So, what does that mean? That means activity in Krishna consciousness, or acting for the benefit of Krishna without expectation of sense gratification, is the highest transcendental quality of work. Even a small beginning of such activity finds no impediment, nor can that small beginning be lost at any stage. Any work begun on the material plane has to be completed, otherwise the whole attempt becomes a failure. But any work begun in Krishna consciousness has a permanent effect, even though not finished. The performer of such work is therefore not at a loss, even if his work in Krishna consciousness is incomplete. 1% done in Krishna consciousness bears permanent results, so that the next beginning is from the point of 2%, whereas in material activity, without 100% success, there's no profit. There you go. So, in Krishna consciousness, you can never be a loser. In material life, you can be a complete loser. So, therefore, we have to realize the value of Krishna consciousness. So we're going to stop right there. So we only did one verse today. But these verses have a lot of content in them. They're long purports also. So are there any questions? So, therefore, the Canto 1, Chapter 5, verse 17 is very much connected to Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, verse number 40. Yeah. Huh? Okay. Which says, oh, that was the one I read. Apichet. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, also to that verse. But it's more connected to 240. Although 9:30 is also important. Okay, no questions? Or there are questions?